All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. Good to be here at FanFest. Our pleasure to be with you here in Miami as we talk about the state of baseball statistics and analysis. I'm Brian Kenny of MLB Network. I'm with Vince Gennaro, the president of SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research. And it's good to be here, and we'll talk a little baseball with you and be able to take some of your questions if you have questions for us later on. So anybody that's on the periphery, come on in. We'll be doing this for a few minutes, and we'll be able to take your questions, and you can kind of drive this if you wish. Let me start with, Vince, we were just at, you had your SABR convention, your annual convention in New York City.
Right.
What strikes me when I come to these places is the gap that is there and that I believe is growing between the aficionados, the early sabermetricians, and now the industry itself. And we can see with the technology, virtual reality, heat maps, StatCast, all these things that are available now in the industry and what's being studied by ball clubs themselves in scouting players, evaluating players, and still with fans that are looking at batting average and home runs and RBIs, the things that you and I grew up with.
Yeah.
I wonder, how that gap, widens, or do more fans get into the stats or what the teams are doing, or does it become kind of a proprietary thing with teams and people just enjoy the games?
Well, it's an interesting point, and there is a growing gulf and gap. And you look back, say, 15 years, the information that the sabermetricians had at least was available to the public. It was more that the mindset might not have been there in the public, but the data was there. We're in a situation now where the sabermetricians who work for teams and people on the inside have, much more data than what the average fan has or anybody in the public domain has. So it's very natural for that gulf to widen.
Just to explain it briefly, for a long period of time, the people on the outside who were doing sabermetrics had a much better view of what was happening on the field than the people in the industry of baseball itself. Now you can see small things that are happening, whether it's you'll see players starting to hit from more launch angle, or a few years ago the Oakland A's actually, maybe along the same lines, signed a bunch of players that had an uppercut swing because they didn't want to hit weak ground balls or double play balls, and they wanted to combat all these ground ball pitchers. And we're now kind of following, saying, what is this team up to? What do they know? What are they doing? Why did they sign this guy? And it used to be just on a hunch, or we like the cut of the guy's jib, or I knew his dad, and things like that. Now I'm always wondering, what do they know? And I think that is happening more and more with teams that are doing a lot of deep diving into the information of a player and scouting and evaluating. They'll know much more, and there will be a mindset behind signing players that we will probably catch up to later on.
You're right, and I can remember a couple of years ago, and we were having the discussion about the Houston Astros and Jeff Luhnow and what he knew about keeping the bat in the zone longer, having a certain swing plane that was predictive of overall better performance. And yet that was speculation, and it's things we had heard or picked up in the media, but it really wasn't out there in terms of the data and information.
I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I had a conversation with Jeff Luhnow, the general manager of the Astros, and he had said that there were, I think at the time, and this was kind of earth-shattering at the time, like 5 years ago at the MIT Sloan Analytics Conference, and he'd said there were more than a handful of teams that were out there right then and there, 2012, 2013, that weren't even looking at the stats for their minor league players. Not even looking at what we call results data. They didn't even know how many home runs a guy hit, how many doubles he hit, how many singles. What they knew was the things that the player could largely control with his skill. They knew how many walks he had. They knew how often he chased pitches outside of the strike zone. And they also knew exit velocity, launch, vector, and distance of the ball. In other words, if it found a glove or not, if it was in Reno or Columbia, South Carolina, was immaterial. They want to know, how hard does this player hit the ball on a regular basis? At the time, that was stunning. Now I think we see that and we go, oh, of course. But 4 or 5 years ago, people were stunned by hearing that once again, minor league teams were not even looking at the stats of their own ball players, what we call stats. They were looking at other stats.
That's right. And some of these clubs, major league clubs, invested in the technology to put them in minor league stadiums so that they could have a pro scouting report on the minor league systems of all their all the other 29 teams. And now we've gotten to a point where the Southeast Conference, the SEC, and other major baseball universities and colleges have that equipment in their stadiums as well. So that's the kind of information that's getting picked up to augment and supplement what's going on by scouts.
Now, even as I stand here and I see a guy has a shirt there that said, "We did not suck," the guy with the Chicago Cubs shirt, a lot of the stuff that we do, that we study on a regular basis, is not some dry statistical formula. I'm still fascinated by the question, and I wrote about this. Ahead of the Curve, the book that I wrote last year, is out in paperback now, and I wrote an afterword for it. And I'm still fascinated by the Joe Maddon decision to use Aroldis Chapman in Game 6 of the World Series. Not Game 7, but Game 6. And the thought process there, and Joe Maddon's one of the best in the business, obviously, but his thought process was, I can't lose this game. And he's right. But as I was writing it, Vince, and writing the afterword, I was trying to crystallize my thought. And I said, it's actually not your job to win that game. It's your job to win both games. There's no use winning that game and losing Game 7. And only when I was writing it did it occur to me. Anyway, these are the things we're talking about. Strategy, utilizing your players, when to bring in your big gun out of the bullpen. These are the things that still, I think, having better information and better statistics and probabilities and things like that, and knowing how it exhausted a player to use Aroldis Chapman in Game 6, as we saw readily in Game 7. Those are the things that are still fascinating.
Absolutely. And I think there's this tension between the sprint versus the marathon. And, you know, sometimes when I watch games, maybe less so today than a few years ago, I get the feeling that the manager is desperate to win this game and is not necessarily thinking about the consequences of what it'll mean the next day or even 2 or 3 days later in terms of usage of bullpen in particular. That's really the place where this comes up the most. I think even in the case where the information is available, it's very hard for a manager as skilled and as at top of his game as even a Joe Maddon to really interpret that information and have it override what his otherwise instincts are. It's a very difficult thing. I think 5 or 6 years from now, the managers that come into the game at that point, it'll be an easier decision for them. And we don't always have perfect information, so I don't mean to imply that Maddon was clearly wrong. But I think it's certainly a debatable point.
You know what I would ask? Again, your shirt inspired me. What I would say is, whatever Joe Maddon thought at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he should be doing at 9:30 at night or 10:30 at night, whenever that 7th or 8th inning comes up. That's all I'm saying. Like sabermetrics, statistical analysis, all these things. What it really boils down to is what decisions are you making, and is your own internal bias affecting you, and how is that real world that's happening in front of you affecting you emotionally. And what we talk about in sabermetrics for many decades was reacting dispassionately, reacting not like a robot, not like an automaton, but knowing that, yes, Joe Maddon at that point in the game, he sees his lead going away. Was it 5 runs at the time? I think it was 5.
I think it was something like that.
It was 5 runs, but 2 guys were on, right? Yeah, but 2 guys were on. He says, hey, we're 1 hit, 1 big fly away from a 2-run lead, and then I've got to go to Chapman. True, but he's reacting emotionally. He's fearing the worst possible possibility. Even when he had just used Chapman 2 days before, 42 pitches, he was shot. As we saw in Game 7, he lost, about 3 or 4 miles per hour on his fastball.
Yeah.
So I think he was reacting emotionally, and the point is we all will. So let me ask you this. Is the future of managing someone who is a little farther away? Like, it sounds outlandish, but, again, the guy in the dugout, even you put you and me down there, put a uniform on us, and we're sweating, and we're with the guys, and, oh, my God, what am I going to do? Now there's 2 guys on. Let's get our best pitcher. Vince, we got to do it now. We'll react emotionally just like everybody else.
Sure.
But maybe if we're sitting up there, we don't. Right? Anytime you sit up there, you're removed. You're physically removed, and it's quiet, and it's air conditioned, and you're going over, and you have people giving you real time stats. Yeah. I have a feeling you'll make different decisions. I don't know. Is it better? Will it be better decisions or just different decisions?
Well, first of all, don't forget he did have a 108-year curse on his back too that he was carrying, which just quadruples the pressure of whatever the moment was.
You got to get rid of that, though.
Yeah,
you don't
get
want
rid of that. Now, I'm not sure we'll ever get to a point where the signal calls are going to be made up from the skybox. But I do think the guys who can take objective information and sort that out for exactly what it is without commingling that with the other piece and then independently bring to the table, on the other half of their brain, if you will, what do they know about their players? What do they know about how this guy's going to react under pressure situations, and so forth? So, I don't think either of us are saying that we would be a slave to the numbers, but it really is important to say, this is what the cold, hard numbers say. Now let me blend that with all these other things.
Well, here's the other part of that is, more often than not, we'll see a manager who will think, I can't go to this guy in this situation. He's not ready for it. And I will then, when you have enough data, and you'll see a manager do it season after season, and it's happened to Joe Torre, it's happened to Joe Girardi, guys who are at the top of their game. It happened to Joe Madden. Joe Madden, with that bullpen last year, eventually got to what? 2 guys he could trust? Does that say more about him than the bullpen?
Yeah, I mean, I wondered that myself over the course of the playoffs last year. You're amazed that a team that wins 100 games gets there and there's not broad-based confidence across more players than what he demonstrated he had during the postseason.
Well, that's what's difficult. And when you can look at it, again, this is part of the whole analysis, to look at things coolly, dispassionately, in the offseason perhaps. I mean, all these teams have huge off-season meetings. And I would think at these meetings you would sit down and say, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could we do better? And I think one thing that teams can do better now on a regular basis is decision-making in heated moments, deciding what you want to do in January when you're all sitting there looking at the snow in your stadium. What decisions you make right then and there, you should bring to the field. Well, it doesn't work that way. You're in the heat of battle. That's exactly why you don't. It's exactly why you stick to your principles and your process. Even if it feels wrong, it still could be absolutely right. I'm not, even as we're talking, and I think the future of managing is you still have one guy in charge. You still want that, I don't want to call him a figurehead, but you still have a guy who is an ultimate decision maker. But I really believe, even before I go to getting a manager up in the luxury suites, I want 2 or 3 guys with him. And this could be, again, just a younger, more computer fluid version of Don Zimmer, right? Just think of it as that. Your old buddy who used to help you make decisions. Have 3 guys there, but looking at all the tendencies and the probabilities, and maybe it even goes down to, hey, let's call the player Tyler Clippard. He's lacking confidence right now, Joe. Mm-hmm. Don't go to him. If that's the case, fine. Or he had a bad day. He's got the stomach flu. His girlfriend broke up with him. All these things that you hear, that we often hear, which normally turn out to not be true, but we always give them the benefit of the doubt. I think you want to, still have that, but at least have all that information for everybody. And I think last year maybe it would have saved Buck Showalter. At a certain point, someone would have to say, Buck, we got to get Zach Britton in this game. Somebody needs to be an outside voice and a team of outside voices telling the manager what decisions he should be making. Well,
and I think a wonderful parallel or analogy would be the NFL, where the manager in baseball becomes the head coach, right? And he has, in the case of football, it's the defensive coordinator, it's the special teams guy, it's the offensive coordinator. But in baseball, perhaps it's a mental skills coach, a analytics coach. These guys are in the dugout on a real-time basis, being able to feed information to this head coach, manager, who's making these, who's bundling it all together, and ultimately, where the buck stops it in, making the decision.
The other things you can use now with technology is to go into the bullpen, and you can actually, within a few pitches, what's this guy throwing? The famous stories about Ralph Branca in the bullpen before he went out and got victimized by Bobby Thompson, the shot heard around the world. What if you actually you have velocity, spin rate, and instead of saying, so how does he look, you'd actually see, how is he throwing the ball? Yeah. And if the ball looks dead, maybe it ain't his day. Whatever he ate, maybe he had a big leg workout that day, maybe he was out partying the night before, whatever it is. If that ball ain't spinning the way it's supposed to, if it's not popping the glove within whatever it is, 8, 10, 12 pitches, well, then maybe you start making other decisions. I think that's kind of you could do that today. I wonder if teams are doing that today.
It's a good question. It sounds a lot less romantic to say, gee, his spin rate on his slider's down. That's his out pitch. He's thrown 4 of them so far. He's got nothing. Let's get somebody up in the bullpen. But that's the kind of decision making that could, in fact, raise the probability of winning a game.
And also to use that stuff now, I have a feeling a bunch of teams are doing it, and they don't tell us this, especially when you talk to some of these teams. But why wouldn't you have right away, this is how a pitcher breaks down and reaches his fatigue point on the mound. his stuff will change. His velocity. Now, we're waiting for the velocity will change. The tricky part about that, again, in speaking to many pitching coaches and pitchers, is that the velocity frequently will still stay at a decent level while he's gassed. The reason that is, and pitchers will tell you this, is they will, quote unquote, reach for a little something extra. You know, their arm is shot, they're tired, and that's when they start dragging, and or Matt Harvey told me he started short arming. Whatever it is, you'll start blasting, using more of your body because you know, I'm gassed, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I've got to get this out. So the velocity will fool you for a short period of time. And I've had skilled pitching coaches tell me, I remember sitting once, you know, with a bunch of our ball players who are pitchers say, that guy's shot. Really? Why is he shot? And he would see where his arm was, where his hips were, where he was dropping down. You could see all these telltale signs. And all these things that a skilled coach could tell you, you could get hard information on, mainly with the velocity, but also the spin rate, and see also, hey, how is his mechanical structure? I mean, we can measure these things. Now we're measuring it right here. You can measure these things now. Wouldn't you be able to see, hey, he's short-arming, or he's dropping his hips because he's flailing trying to get more speed? You can know these things as a guy is getting fatigued in the 6th or 7th inning.
Right, and including things like the release point, right? The release point is a very telltale sign. So we now have the release point of every pitch. Let's say the fastball is from here the first 8 times he throws it. Then it's from here. Now it's coming over here. I mean, this is telling you something. It's telling you either he's sloppy with his mechanics or he's fatigued. Or maybe he's even got this is a precursor to an injury. I want to ask you a question. Now that you're at MLB Network and you did at ESPN, where you're working with players. You know, I know where you come at the game from. You come at the game very much from the analytical side. What has being in an environment with other players who played the game, who are thinkers also, how has that impacted you, and what have you taken away from all that?
I think you learn, and this was always the case, where you learn an enormous amount from the major league players and the ex-major league players. Again, being from the sabermetrics side, I always just held that they didn't have 100% of the information. But the fact is, they don't have zero either. They have an awful lot. And if you keep your eyes and your ears open, and this is vice versa for them, they should be listening to what analysts are telling them. We need to also be listening to the players. All these little things I'm talking about and you brought up a good point, release point. All these things you can get from guys who have been around the game, guys who have pitched. You can learn an enormous amount of guys from players who are out there in the fight. What's fascinating to me now is we're kind of, merging now, where guys who are, in the game right now are studying all these state-of-the-art things. They know where their strengths and weaknesses are. They have heat maps to show them. They know, Joey Votto knows exactly what his numbers are, his results numbers are, when he swings at a pitch outside of the zone. I think that's the next revolution, where the analysts are the players themselves, and they're, of course, going to have all the information that is out there, that their teams can purchase for them.
Yeah, and we're seeing it now. I mean, David Murphy was famous this spring training for Daniel Murphy for determining that Ryan Zimmerman was not launching the ball at a high enough launch angle. He was hitting the ball with a lot of velocity, really striking the ball, but he was pounding it into the ground, and his results suffered. So he went to Ryan Zimmerman, Daniel Murphy did, and said, you've got to find a way to get more loft in your batted balls. And, of course, Ryan Zimmerman's having a phenomenal season, the best he's had in many years. So it's those kinds of things where you'll see players like this who adopt this kind of insight and information pretty readily.
And what you have then, to take the next step, when you have pitchers who are not walking guys and who are just trying to strike them out and are throwing full bore, full blast, even at the risk of their own health, and you have players who are not ashamed to strike out, knowing that a strikeout is only a little worse than a ground out, and also that you just want to launch the ball. What you have is now the 3 true outcomes of baseball coming to the fore, the old sabermetric theories of, hey, walks, home runs, strikeouts, that's where it's at. The old kind of Oakland A's baseball, or kind of that Adam Dunn player who was denigrated years ago for not being a real ball player, not doing the little things, and sabermetricians and everybody was saying, no, that guy's hitting 40 home runs and walking 100 times a year. He's great. No matter what else he does, he could stink at everything else, he's still great. But now what do you do? We've talked about this. What do you do when everybody's doing that? What do you do when Jock Peterson is up there and everything is just, wah! Everything is going to be a home run or a whiff. And knowing that, no, this is where it's at. I'm an efficient ball player. Again, Jock Peterson, Joey Gallo, Joey Votto, extremely efficient players. They take a huge hack knowing I want to crush the ball. Because if I'm not crushing the ball, I might as well miss the ball. It's basically where we're at now. But that's not good for the game, Vince. That's not where it's at for baseball and being enjoyable to the fan.
No, it isn't. It creates longer games. It creates games with less balls in play and less action. But we've got a number of guys now in the game who will have a 225 batting average with a 375 on base percentage and a slugging percentage that might be in the 500s.
Right.
It's a very, we used to call that Dave Kingman back in the day. But now that's more prevalent than ever before. And I don't know how that gets reversed, that trend.
Maybe you can ask the commissioner tomorrow when he's sitting here.
Yeah.
But I know he's aware of it, and he's aware of where it's headed. And I wonder, we're getting ready for the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame induction ceremony is coming up at the end of the month, and we'll be there airing it on MLB Network. And I'm just doing my early study for it, and just going over the names like Rod Carew, and players like that, thinking, these guys were magicians with the bat, spraying singles all over the field, hitting 388, and it was exciting. The ball was in play. Baseball is a lot more exciting when the ball is in play. The issue is, incentives have to align, or you have to manage the game. As Commissioner Manfred often says, the game is changing. You can choose to manage it, or you can choose to just let it veer where it's going to be. Can it manage itself, or does baseball have to impose some regulation on it?
Well, it's a great question, and I think one of the real tests is the shift. The shifts we're seeing on defense is neutralizing particularly a lot of left-handed hitters. And I keep waiting for this flood of left-handed hitters to just go the other way, right? To either just take the ball deeper into the zone and go to the opposite field, or bunt more often during that, essentially to that vacated side of the field, which gives them almost an assured base hit. We're seeing it somewhat. We're seeing it more today than we were 2 or 3 years ago. But I'm amazed at how long it seems to be taking for the rationalization of all this to occur, for hitters to do it. So the answer to your question lies in, will this happen organically by itself, or do we have to have some sort of rule change or some catalyst to move it along? Right.
I wonder, too, are we incentivizing those players who are there? Likely the players who are ready to spray the ball the other way that are hitting 370, or are 13 years old. But are they going to be promoted along the way? Like, is the next Rod Carew going to be able to get through the minor leagues? That's the issue.
Yeah. And the same thing can be said with the two-strike approach. Those of us who are a little older, when we were growing up, hitters approached the ball differently, approached their at-bat differently once they had 2 strikes on them. You see a lot less of that today. It'll happen for a few folks, but for the most part, you'll see a guy 3-1-0-2 take the same swing at the pitch. And, I remember asking a general manager once while I was watching a game with him when a star player was doing that, and he said, we've talked to him about it, obviously, but the reality is he doesn't want to change his game because this is what got him there. And he believes if he starts making those adjustments at 2 strikes, he may sort of lose his swing. I don't know if he pushed back on that and really started, but that was the answer that he got.
And other things, and get ready for some questions. We'll take your questions, and don't be shy. Just if you think, that's a stupid question, no. Just ask a question and get into the conversation. I want to ask you first about Hall of Fame. Again, Hall of Fame induction ceremonies are coming up at the end of the month. We'll be in Cooperstown, and I've just started doing my study, and we kind of follow this year-round. Give me a player that you think has been overlooked, that statistical analysis is kind of shining a light on, that you think either just made the Hall of Fame or should be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, the best example of the guy who finally got his due was Tim Raines. People in the sabermetric community have been arguing for Tim Raines for years. He had the penalty of playing at the same time as Rickey Henderson. He was a version of Rickey Henderson, not quite the version that Rickey was, but not as distant a gap as I think many perceived. And a lot of it has to do with the appreciation of on-base percentage. of conserving and not making one of those 27 outs in a baseball game, which basically is the real key to the game, is to keep the train moving, keep the line moving. And so that was a great example of someone who finally got his respect. A guy who is coming up, and he's still got a few years, and I'm hoping he makes enough progress, is Mike Mussina. And here's where we get into things like the quality of the opposition the player faced. Mike Mussina played his entire career in the American League East. I remember doing an analysis a couple of years ago that I shared with Brian. The OPS, right, the offensive performance of the batters that Mussina faced was significantly higher than the ones that those Braves pitchers faced. Nothing to take away from the Glavine and Smoltz and Maddox. But we're talking about they faced talent level down here, particularly because you had to face the pitcher in the National League. And Mussina, because not only didn't he face the pitcher, but he faced some really good hitting teams, was looking at opponents up here, and he was still able to compile the numbers that he compiled.
Yeah, that's even and it amazes me the way the voting is done even to this day. While the voting has gotten better, the lack of sophisticated analysis and understanding of nuance for something that's actually quite simple. Like you just explained it took you 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's not. And anybody who's a baseball writer now who has a Hall of Fame vote, if you say, hey, the AL East of the 90s and the aughts, what does that mean to you? I mean, it's a blockbuster offenses that he's facing all the time. Not only that, Mussina was pitching for the Orioles for a bunch of those years. He had to face the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Right.
Like, it's not that hard to figure out. But even Curt Schilling, who's a polarizing figure now, Curt Schilling, like, how has he gotten so low? Even before he became kind of a social media pariah, which, okay, that affects the vote. I disagree with that, too. But, however, he's coming off being, a winner, being a champion for multiple teams, being one of the best postseason pitchers of all time, part of baseball lore, and yet a very low vote total first 2 years in.
I wonder if there's a paradox here, and I wonder if he's so thought of as a great postseason pitcher, if in a strange way, that's overshadowing what he accomplished during the regular season. It's almost the opposite of the argument you otherwise would make. But I'm grasping for reasons.
Because there's no reason. Yeah. There's no legitimate reason why. Here's a guy that actually, from my study recently, that's getting better and better and better to me. That I'm wondering, and I'm looking at the Detroit, sign right there.
Yeah.
And the guy that gets better and better, and I'm not even talking about Alan Trammell, because Trammell to me he's an easy pick, an easy Hall of Famer, top 10 shortstop of all time. But Lou Whitaker, the more I actually study and I just broaden my mind, because basically I'll give you my normal test case is if you're a 5-win player for 10 years, you're a Hall of Famer. 5 wins is 5 wins above replacement. That means you're higher than an all-star. So if you do 5 for 10 years, basically you're a Hall of Famer. 12, even better. Lou Whitaker was more like a 4 to 4.5 win player, but for like 17 years.
Wow.
And each year he was giving you just another very good above average year. But he just kept doing it. In his 30s, he was better than he was in his 20s. But because he was actually a great power hitter, but for a second baseman. And also in kind of a dead ball era.
Yeah.
So he has these things working against him. But with a little bit of digging, you clearly see that Lou Whitaker's a Hall of Famer. It seems easy to me. And there's a bunch of guys like that. Whitaker and Grich, I know Grich is another sabermetric darling. But to me, Whitaker and Trammell, they really have gotten the shaft from the Hall of Fame voters.
Doesn't it seem like candidates need an advocate, a vocal advocate sometimes, and that's what gets them off the dime? There were a lot of people who were behind Tim Raines, and it took a while for it to all happen. But they kept the argument alive, and I don't know that Trammell or Whitaker ever had that either.
No, that's true. And I know with Raines, this is part of the problem. I was still at ESPN when he went on the ballot. And every single person I interviewed, I said, hey, is Tim Raines a Hall of Famer? He's on the ballot first time this year. Every time I asked somebody, the answer was yes. But after a while, I realized I'm talking to Peter Gammons, Tim Kirkchin, Jason Stark. I'm speaking to the smart baseball writers, the national guys who are covering the game. And probably of that set of people that, we would speak to in our community, same thing on MLB Network, I'll talk to Joel Sherman, John Heyman, Ken Rosenthal. And I rarely get something where I think, wow, you're really not doing your work. I mean, almost never. And even if I disagree, I disagree with Tom Verducci on a bunch of players. But it's not because he's not doing the work. But with that extra, 450 voting writers, they're not doing the work. I mean, they're just not. They're not looking at, and that what it's led to now is you have a vast underrepresentation of the 80s, 90s, and now the aughts of the modern ball player. The guys that we watched growing up, they're not getting into the Hall of Fame. Fred McGriff is a very strong candidate. He is not getting into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
There's 24 Hall of Fame worthy players that were on the ballot that got almost next to no play at all, on the vote. And that to me, it's like this anti-recency bias that, well, we saw them. How many can you really get in? And the answer is no. You can get all of these great players in. You absolutely can.
So who are some of the first? They'll be on the ballot for the first time in January. Who are some of those that you think deserve full consideration?
I'll refresh my memory. Who's on for the first time?
That's what I was trying to think of. Is who was.
Well, I know one guy that's on there. Like Scott Rowland is a stronger candidate than you think. Omar Vizquel is getting a lot of play, and I hate to say it, but actually looking at his offensive production, I'm not on that.
Yeah.
And normally I'd be 100% behind a very good fielding shortstop. But he's not there for me. I think the other one is Andruw Jones. Andruw Jones, by his fielding alone, when you put the package together, is a Hall of Famer. I didn't think that going in. I also don't think that for Scott Rowland. But if you want to make a case for Scott Rowland and say he's actually one of the top 10 third basemen in the history of baseball, you would be correct. And you would then ask me, is that a Hall of Famer? My answer would be yes. That should be a Hall of Famer.
On Omar Vizquel, what about the longevity factor? And could his glove, which aged extremely well, have put him in the penalty situation of having to bat, have his offensive performance ultimately drag himself down?
Even at his peak, he wasn't a good enough offensive player. I believe he had one or two outstanding seasons offensively that he's just not there.
Yeah.
Again, and look, if you want to really get behind, there's a lot of ways of doing this. In baseball history, guys who are famous, guys who are representative of their era, guys who are great players or had a certain skill that was outrageous, and his glove was, I'm fine with that. But I would then say, what about Alan Trammell, who was just better? It was just much better.
And you're saying the candidacy of Trammell and Vizquel's not that close?
No, not to me.
Yeah.
No, Trammell's a much better player all around. And Trammell's base running was excellent. And Trammell's offense was much, much better. And his defense was not – his defense may have been better than Vizquel. Maybe it wasn't as aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
But I bet you if we looked at, the rudimentary stats that we had from the era trying to figure out their zone rating and their defensive run saved, we'd probably find Trammell was a better defensive player than Omar Vizquel.
Yeah.
Didn't look as good, but it was there. All right. We're getting there now. A few minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions? And you can spur us into different topics. We'll geek out on Hall of Fame all you want. Come on, you guys have some. You're sitting here. That guy was paying attention. I saw you. I appreciate it. Good. Just hand him the microphone. Ask any question you want. Come on, you got to have something. Who are you a fan of? Don't be shy. Who are you a fan of? Make your friend speak. Make him speak. That's all right. How about right there? We got it right there. Yeah, he'll take the mic. Oh, you got to go to the spot. I'm sorry. We're going to make you get up and go. All right. And think of your questions now. Get involved, and it'll drive the conversation. Don't be shy. It's just us. Come on. Yes.
Jack Morris.
How you doing? What about him?
Should he be in the Hall of Fame?
I think he's a very strong candidate. Now, I got out of the business of bashing Jack Morris for the Hall of Fame because there was a whole wing of baseball writers and old-timers that thought this guy was durable, and they were right. This guy was an all-time great, and he had to be in the Hall of Fame. If I had had a vote through all those years, I would not have put him in. If you want to tell me that he's deserving of getting in, I'm fine with that. He was an extremely durable guy. He 8 innings. He was a big-time pitcher on some of the biggest stages that were out there. But I just think there are better run preventers that were up for candidacy during his era and are still on the ballot.
I would express it exactly that way. I mean, I would have no issue with him being in. He happens to not be the guy that I would fight for, but I think it's respectable that he'd be in there. Absolutely, he was a terrific pitcher. But I think Jim Cott. I'd love to see Jim Cott in the Hall of Fame with his 283 wins and everything he did and his 16 Gold Gloves and so forth. I mean, I think he's a guy that really deserves to be in.
Thank you.
Makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions? There we go. Yeah, you got one. Come on up. Ask away, man.
I'm not sure if I missed it, but do you guys think Chipper Jones is going to make it in the first time?
Oh, yeah. That's a lock. Yeah, Chipper's up next year, too. I couldn't think of who exactly was getting in. But, yeah, Chipper is one of the top 5 or 6 third basemen in the history of the game. Yeah. No, I think Chipper's a lock.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Chipper also – yeah, go ahead. Ask a question. Chipper also, if you look the second half of his career, he was one of the kind of like Gary Sheffield, outrageous offensive production, but he missed a lot of games each and every year. But his first, was it 8 or 10 years? First 8 or 10 years were just, he's somewhere in that George Brett category. I don't think he's Mike Schmidt, but I think he's right there in that second tier of all-time great third baseman. Yes.
2 questions for Hall of Fame: Dale Murphy and Steve Garvey.
Dale Murphy for me is a yes. I'm more of a peak voter. I don't have a vote. I'm just saying my theoretical vote. I'm much more for Dale Murphy and Don Mattingly than other people because I think if you went, I wrote a whole column on this that's on Sports on Earth. You can look it up. There's a whole list of players that for a short period of time were the best players in the game. And I'm more of a peak guy, meaning if you were a top guy in the game, Johan Santana's another one. We have an outrageous peak. I'd be more willing to give you the vote than a guy who is doing it, who's very good for 18 to 20 years.
Yeah. What about Garvey?
Garvey, for me, it's interesting. Garvey falls short in the statistics that I value. But there is a case to be made that when he was playing, batting average, RBIs were the things you shot for. He was a very consistent player. He was a very good postseason player. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember, while he was playing, he was spoken of as a future Hall of Famer. So, again, I'm not against it. It's almost like when a Veterans Committee, that Veterans Committee vote of 2 or 3 years ago came up, and Maury Wills was on it, and Louis Tiant, Ken Boyer, a whole bunch of players. My feeling was, if any one of those guys gets in, good, especially if they're alive. I'm for it. I'm in favor of it. If Steve Garvey suddenly gets a push, it's not like he wasn't an excellent and representative player of his era.
What about Keith Hernandez?
Keith Hernandez, to me, is no question a Hall of Famer. Absolutely. The greatest defensive player at his position. Also, top 3 in on-base percentage, 7 of 8 years. And that one year that he wasn't, he was like in the top 10. This guy, to me, because he doesn't look like Harmon Killebrew. We have this image of a first baseman's got to be this big, hulking, hopefully right-handed guy, or even maybe if it's Willie McCovey from the left side. But because he's viewed as Punch and Judy and was playing in a dead ball era, his numbers don't look great. I actually wrote up a thing on Hernandez for my book that hit the cutting room floor that my son said, "You're rambling on. Stop." My editor, my son, and my editor. And so that got, but you can do this on Baseball Reference. You go on baseballreference.com?
Yeah, yes.
If you go on baseballreference.com, you can get anybody's numbers and then just go and either neutralize them or put them in a certain year at a certain ballpark. And I picked Keith Hernandez's numbers. And they'll do home runs, RBIs, batting average, and the on-base and slugging. And they'll say, this is what the player would have done. And I put Keith Hernandez 2009 in Chicago, in U.S. Cellular Park. A good offensive year, but not great. And a good offensive park, but not great. I didn't put him in 2000 in Colorado. That's the most outrageous offensive numbers. And there you saw Keith Hernandez, instead of having 19 homers and 82 RBIs or 22 homers and 95 RBIs, suddenly had 30 homers and 110 RBIs. And his numbers suddenly looked like Eddie Murray. And there, I think the voters would have said, hey, that guy's actually a pretty good power hitter. Because when you watched Keith Hernandez play, you knew he was a guy you wanted at the plate in a big moment. He was, I hate to say, clutch, but he was a very good contact hitter. He could come up in big moments. He had good doubles power. He would draw the walk. He was truly a great player. So I'm big on Keith Hernandez.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? We have questions. We can drive it. We can talk. There you go, right there. Ask away.
So, you guys talk a lot about statistics. How much weight do you put into just the eye test? I watched a lot of baseball for 30 years now, and I get what you're saying about. But it's funny, you're talking about statistics, but a lot of your statistics are lining up with my eye test. Keith Hernandez is a perfect example. I watched Hernandez play. I'm a huge Met fan. He did intangibles that don't show up in statistics. This guy did so many things to better his teammates and, just defensively, I mean, he was a general out there.
Right.
You know, like Alan Trammell, I just felt like he passed that eye test. There's nothing great about him, but he was really good at everything.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
how is that guy not a Hall of Famer?
That makes you great. Yeah.
You know
that's
what
true.
I mean? But I just think that sometimes, I think it's with all the statistical analysis nowadays, I think people are getting away from just the eye test of looking at a guy. Dale Murphy, another guy I agreed with you on.
Yeah.
I watched the guy play. I mean, how's he not a Hall of Famer?
Right. No, I agree with you on that. And I would say, actually, the players I picked for my chapter, I did one Hall of Fame chapter in my book, Ahead of the Curve, and I picked the players that are better than their numbers. I'm picking on the sports writers a little bit, saying the one thing a sports writer who has a Hall of Fame vote, that one thing that he's supposed to be better at than I am is he's at the games. Like, that's why they got the vote in the first place. So you can't tell me that if you were at a game, you didn't think Keith Hernandez was great. Exactly. And same thing, I picked Keith Hernandez, Alan Trammell, and Dwight Evans. There were three players, and what do all these guys have in common?
See, like Vizquel. Sorry, no. Like Vizquel, like you were down on Vizquel. You said not down on him, but you just watched him defensively. I mean,
he's a great defensive player.
I just think
the difference is though that Dwight Evans in the second half of his career was for 2 or 3 seasons the best offensive player in the American League.
And his arm.
Yeah, right.
I mean, his arm superseded.
That's his calling card.
You know what I mean? I just felt like there's people that just have abilities that are just transcending others at their position.
That happens.
Evans' arm, Vizquel's aesthetic defensively.
You always have
Keith Hernandez's intangibles.
Well, you always have to be careful, though, with what we call in boxing ring generalship.
With what?
Ring generalship.
Oh, okay.
That's the thing that they say, well, he didn't land many punches, but he showed ring generalship. What the hell is that? Right, a lot of it is nonsense, but there's something to it. You're responding to Keith Hernandez controlling the situation defensively in the infield. I saw it too, right? But
he was awesome offensively too.
Yes, right. That's what you need.
The guy had countless Gold Gloves, but I just feel like a lot of the new statistical analysis.
That's where you're wrong. That's why I'm going to shut you down. That's where you're wrong. The new statistical
you don't think
analysis
that's getting people away from the eye test?
No, the eye test is always the first thing you've got. And what I look for is when I'm watching a guy, boy, I like what this guy's doing. I saw Seth Lugo pitch for the Mets. I just went to a Met game. I'm sitting behind the plate, and I'm watching him, and I'm just eye test only. I'm like, this guy's good.
Yes,
like this guy's good.
His spin rate. Everyone here knows about his spin rate now.
I'm seeing him change speeds. I'm seeing him like pop the mitt and strike a guy out on a fastball, and I look up and it says 92, and I'm like, how did he do that? I knew. This, again, kind of a loose anecdotal thing. He looked like a guy who knew how to pitch. And I didn't know anything about him. So, no, the eye test is the first thing. Then you've got to go to some statistics to see, all right, is this validating or is it refuting what I think I'm seeing? There you go.
And I value the eye test a lot as well. And I think it's important that when the eye test and the statistics don't agree, that you sit down and you try to understand what the discrepancy is. Is it the ballpark he played in? Maybe the eye test had a player here, the stats are here. Maybe he's playing in Colorado. Maybe he's playing in a home run park or vice versa. So I think they're both important. I don't think we're ever going to get away from the eye test because everybody has the eyes, right? So
really?
I think, and the other thing is what the statistical piece does, we're measuring so many more things today than what we used to. We are measuring all the things that your eyes see virtually, and just think of how much more reach we have with the data, right? You could only watch, any one person or group of people could only watch so many ball games, but the data will expand your vision, essentially.
I'll give you an example now, that a thing that we're playing with on a daily basis on MLB Tonight that they do on StatCast, catch probability, right? Now, catch probability, you will see, and we've run one clip after another where a guy is making a diving catch into the gap, and it looks sensational, and we go out of our minds. And then we look at a catch where a guy just was doing a run, he just on a dead run, boom, and he brings it in. And we've looked at them, and they were exactly the same. Hang time, time in the air, exact same distance. One guy ran it down perfectly.
Yeah, one guy had a better route to the ball.
Right. Well, that guy did, and the other guy did a long dive, maybe at a different route, or he's slower, whatever it is. He made it look better. So that's where the eye test, you would say, that guy made a great catch, that guy made a nice catch. And actually, they're exactly the same. And catch probability will now tell you that.
And what about the guy who had a 1.2-second delay before he even reacted to the batted ball because he froze because he couldn't tell where it was going? And he makes a, quote, great play at the end, but in reality, he should have had a much better read, right? So those are the things that we're learning now.
To me, that's Hernandez. Hernandez was just always in the right place.
Yeah.
So he didn't, maybe he didn't look sensational, but all the other guys weren't
No, but he did. But I'll give you an example, too. Something that Bill James did about 25 years ago was he looked at how many outs were recorded by the first baseman at different bases, not first base. The flip to first base don't count.
Right.
How many times did he nail a guy at second, at third, and at the plate? And what he found was the St. Louis Cardinals were about 20 runs better, 20 outs better than anyone else than average team in the National League. And then when he went to the Mets became about 20 outs.
Well, you remember
ahead
how
of everybody
Hernandez
else.
used to field the bunts. I mean, Hernandez used to be the best in the world.
He took both sides away.
Yeah, I
All
mean,
right.
it was amazing.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? We'll get you before we wrap up. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Come on, you're sitting right there. You don't want to. Come on. Yeah, you. You can ask a question. Go ahead. One more question. We'll force you. It's good. Ask a question. Get involved.
And then I want to say a few words about SABR as we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
It's really not exactly on point, but I don't really enjoy sort of what's happening now with the Marlins, where you have the bullpen being, in my opinion, overutilized. I enjoy where you have the starters going more than 5, like going 6 or 7 at minimum. And I understand why Mattingly's doing it now, but it's just, to me, it seems disruptive. And, you know, my great uncle operated on Babe Ruth, so I came from a Yankee family.
He operated on Babe Ruth?
Yeah, he was an orthopedic surgeon.
All right, good.
He removed the hot dogs from his stomach, I think.
Well,
So
more
he's
than
licensed.
that.
That's
right.
important, yeah.
But so it was a strong Yankee family, and we moved down.
Right.
When everybody moved down here, we had no team. And then you started following the Braves a little because that's what would be on TV. And then obviously we got the Marlins. But it's just not, it doesn't seem as enjoyable to me when you're just another call to the bullpen.
Right. I hear you on that. I don't think you're going to like what I have to say.
Exactly.
I would operate, again, there are two things happening. What wins baseball games? What's the best thing for Major League Baseball? And I've already said, I would go after the Joey Vottos, the Jock Petersons, the all-or-nothing home run hitter who has great strike zone discipline. That's the guy I want. But I realize when the entire game is doing that, and every kid, you know, out of Las Vegas, Georgia, and Florida is doing that, it's not good for the game. Also, what is better for teams to win? I would start with a relief pitcher. I would start with a relief pitcher, especially in the National League. He would never bat. First time he came up in the order, pinch hitter. Go to the guy that you thought was your starter, have him pitch 3-4 innings, then go to your bullpen. I call it bullpenning, and it's actually in my book. Did a whole chapter on bullpenning. There's more than enough innings, but I recognize it's not as romantic. It's not as, you know, you like the hey, I'm going to see. Hey, it's Verlander versus Sabathia. There is. I'm not making fun of romance. I'm saying, no, that's romantic. That's fun. That's two leading men taking the stage, or a prize fight. Those are our leading guys that are going to be pitching. We like that. But I'm saying that's from the 1800s, and it's just better to have 5 or 6 guys come in and blast for those 9 innings.
Yeah. And long gone are the days of that Warren Spahn, Juan Marichal marathon game. Was in 1966 when they went 16 innings. They both pitched complete games. One of them threw 215 pitches. And by the way, I was listening to a game the other night. They were talking about it. And, Spahn only had 2 strikeouts in that game. Talk about pitch to contact. It's amazing.
So the ball was in play a few times.
Yeah.
That's it.
I wanted to just say a few words about SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research, before we sign off here. We're an organization that's 6,000 strong, just people who are passionate about the game. There's no qualifications to be a member per se. It's just a passion for the game and a very modest annual dues. You get our publications. You get access to our conferences at discounts. And our website is sabr.org. You see our logo up here on the back behind us. And the organization is 48 years old. We just had our 48th National Convention in New York City for the first time in 26 years, just last week. And, next year we're hoping to be in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for our convention around the 20th of June. So think about SABR. If you have the kind of passion to sit through a conversation like this, you'll probably really enjoy SABR.
And you will. If you get the newsletter as well, the SABR newsletter, and you follow it, you'll see it really will open your mind to so many avenues of baseball history, just in and the latest statistical analysis, and just a lot of fun baseball things. The best writers are there, and there's so many people, historians and very intelligent people who have another job, who just love baseball, who will write interesting things all the time. Something that came up at the convention that I didn't know the answer to. Let's see if anybody knows this answer. I don't know if we have a shirt to give out or something. Yeah, we do. We have stuff to give out. What is the most prevalent score in a baseball game?
Interesting.
What's the number one score in the history of baseball? It's not 0-0. Clearly the game ends. It's not 15-8. It's not that. But what's the score? What's that? History of the whole game. 1-0. No. What? 3-2 is correct.
Yeah.
This man right here. Good job. Let's get him something. We get him some. Give him the microphone, your headset, whatever. There we go. Shirt. MLB.com shirt right there. All right. Hey, for Vince Gennaro, I'm Brian Kenny. Thanks for sitting through. Good job on the answer. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Good chatting with you. Take care.